There was also at one point in time a large jar of eyelids. Do you remember that part?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so disgusting.
Books and Brunch with Amber and Noelle.
Hi, welcome to Books and Brunch. I'm Noelle.
And I'm Amber.
And today we are talking about Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. It has been a while because this is a big book and life
Very, very
is
big.
busy. So yeah, let's jump right in. This is a story that covers a lot of time. There's many generations of a couple different families that this book follows, which makes it really fun because there's a lot of characters, and there's a lot of weird, non-traditional family values.
Yeah.
The way I would describe this book, if someone were to say, what's that book about? I would say it's about a cult or a secret society that searches the world for natural-born mediums, people who can see spirits, talk to spirits, summon entities, and they essentially use them as a vessel to speak to the god that their cult worships, sacrifices to in exchange for wealth and power. So it's a very like Illuminati type family from South America. They own all of the yerba mate plantations. They own a lot of the industry. They're kind of well connected when it comes to government. They seem to be above the law. And it all kind of goes back to their founding father, who had this spiritual experience with like a dark entity, and in exchange for blood, body parts, human sacrifices, the family line has maintained wealth, prestige, and power within this secret society.
And it's very dark. It's a very dark book. There's some really like grotesque descriptions, kind of gory.
Oh yeah. She doesn't shy away from really showing you every bit of what's happening, especially when it comes to someone being injured or some sort of weird sacrifice taking place. Just all the details.
One of the worst ones I thought was, I won't give away spoilers, but when he was taking someone's teeth and licking them clean because they weren't in the person's mouth anymore. Grotesque, I think, would be a good word. And I was watching an interview with her, and she said she kind of started more liking Gothic, but she always liked feeling scared. And she said she read Jane Eyre, and that was kind of her first one that made her like horror, I guess, and which I guess more she was talking about that one in reference to Gothic, but what led into the feeling of feeling scared. And yeah, I never would have been like, oh, Jane Eyre was her inspiration. Yeah. She liked the one that you love,
Shirley Jackson.
I always want to say Shelley. Shirley Jackson, she's a big fan of her and Lovecraft. And so that's kind of, she was talking about like the road she went down, and that to write a whole novel, she says she has to really engulf herself like in that world to write something so long and to just be in it. I'm like, oh, what was it like to engulf herself in this world for that long to write this book? Because I wouldn't want to be in this state of mind for very long, I don't think.
I totally would. I haven't had this much fun reading a book in so long. I would say hands down this is in my top 5 favorite books now. I would read it again. I cried at the end because I didn't want it to be over. What I loved about this book were the characters, absolutely, and the sort of just accepting that there's magic in the world. There's other worlds that you can cross into seamlessly just by opening up a door in a house that wasn't there the day before. And now suddenly here's this door, and with the right person at the right time of day with the planets in line, you can open that door and be in a completely different world. Love stuff like that. I love the idea of Juan, who is the main character. Well, I don't know if he's the main character, but he's the medium. He's the medium who marries a member of the royal family, not royal family, but a member of the cult family, one of the daughters, and then they give birth to potentially one of the more powerful mediums to have ever been born, Gaspar. So Juan, Gaspar, and Rosario is like the central, I would say, main characters. When we meet Juan and Gaspar, they're on a road trip to take care of some things that Juan is very cryptic about, and he's keeping from his son, who at the time is like 8.
I think he's even younger. I think he's
the first one. He is young.
Yeah, I want to say he's like 5 or something, because they point out like how smart he is and that he's reading and doing these things that a child that young wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, seeing ghosts, your typical kind of quirky 5-year-old thing.
Yeah, you know.
But we learn right away that Gaspar's mother and Juan's wife, Rosario, is dead. And right away we know that there's something suspicious about it. For one, Juan is unable to do a ritual to find out where she is on the other side. So he believes that someone is keeping her from him and like blocking them. And the other thing is, we know bits by what Juan is kind of telling us, but also kind of when we're getting a little bit of history of the families, that Rosario's mother, Mercedes, is a terrible person, and that her and Rosario did not get along, and she did not approve of Juan and Rosario's marriage. Right off the bat, you're like, tons of tension, tons of things at stake. You have a lot of questions like, why is this kid seeing ghosts? Why is the father picking up on these really strange things and being like, oh, they're gonna come for my son? And you're like, what is happening? And it's done. The book is cut into a couple different parts, kind of based on whose perspective, whose story, and what time.
Yeah, it's another one that doesn't have chapters. And so it has these different sections, and they're very long. And so if you're like me and you like to kind of cut your reading off at chapters, it makes it difficult because it doesn't have those. They don't always use quotation marks, and that drives me crazy. I know it's like a stylistic choice, but it drives me crazy because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So there's like all the family drama, but then there's a lot of the political drama that's happening at that time.
Oh yeah.
And then also Juan, the father, he was born with a heart defect. So he's constantly having health issues and having to work around that while he's also dealing with these other things. Lots of different elements of tension and problems, not just like the main problem.
There are characters you meet at a certain point in time when Gaspar is older and he and Juan are living in Argentina in just like a regular middle-class neighborhood, but they clearly have more money than everybody, but they don't live necessarily like they do, other than they've always got nurses coming by the house.
The biggest, hugest like house in the area, but unfurnished. Yeah. It's very bare inside. Right. But anytime they want money or need something, they just ask and it shows up.
Super, super bizarre childhood to be born into for Gaspar. But he does his best to kind of have like a normal childhood. And he has these friends. They all kind of live in the same neighborhood. One of the friends she's missing an arm. And I think it's cut off at the elbow.
Maybe right above. She does have like part of her arm. It's not the whole arm.
She's an amputee. And there are a lot of amputees in the cult. And so this becomes a weird theme where right away when you meet Gaspar's friends as he's a preteen and teenager, there's always in the back of my mind was like, why is his friend an amputee? And why does the friend's single mother seem like she knows Juan from the past? And those pieces come further along in the story that become by far one of the more interesting storylines. The mother, Betty, and the daughter.
I didn't put together the whole amputation thing. And I was just like, oh, that's weird that she lies about, because she comes up with this story why she has this amputated arm, and Gaspar, they don't believe her. And I was just like, oh, poor girl.
And I'm like, suspicious. Also, she talks about her father being part of the rebellion. We later find out that her mother and father were both part of the Argentinian rebellion. And I don't know if you remember from like history in high school or college, but they talk about the disappeared people who the Argentinian government would just abduct, and no one would ever know what happened to them because they were, politically active. That's definitely in the background, and it doesn't really come into the forefront until we learn Betty's backstory and her connection to the cult and her connection to Rosario. There's so much to talk about with this book, but one thing that I think is my favorite thing about this book, and I'll stop right after this and we can talk about recipes, is there's something meta going on in this book. It's a book that is aware that it's a book that is self-conscious about the shortcomings of human language, and it's constantly reminding us of that. I have like a million passages underlined where I just was like, yes, this book is pointing out that you can't trust language. Language is inherently false. Like, we can have a feeling, we can know a truth, and the second we put it into words, we put it into writing, it's now less true somehow because our words can't capture truth fully. This is one of my favorite quotes, especially because they're talking about this religious cult where a lot of the people in the cult studied like Gnostic teachings. They would send them to London to go to school to study like theosophy and magical arts and mythology. One thing that you weren't allowed to do in the cult was to ever question the word of the darkness or the dark god that they worshipped. But they had these scribes who, in a trance, when they would have their ceremonies, would write down what they swear they heard the darkness say. And Rosario's friend, they were all talking about the writing or the teachings of the darkness. And her friend said, I think they're lying. Like, I think the scribes are bullshitting and they're just writing stuff down and it's not real. And Rosario's like, you can't say that. Like, my mom would lose her shit if she heard you say that or thought that you said that. But from that moment on, Rosario's faith in the cult and in the writings of the scribe, it's like it planted a seed of doubt, and she starts really questioning truth. And she says, Hermes was the god of writing, but he was also the god of falsehood. Laura was her friend who questioned it. So Laura says, I don't trust the writings of the scribe. I don't think that that's like really the words of the god. And Rosario's first thought was of Hermes, the god of writing, but also the god of falsehood, the god of teaching, the god of messages, but also the trickster god. And then we feel, though, that there's these real philosophical truths within the book under the guise of being fiction. So it's like, you read the Bible, people have a lot of questions about holy books, any holy book, because they're being told it's true. But you take something that's fiction and they're saying, none of this is true. It's a fiction story. And then you find stuff in there that you're like, that's truth.
Yeah, whenever they were talking about when they had like their first ceremony and they were kind of explaining that no one knows, because when the darkness is kind of present, nobody can hear anything. Nobody can hear what the darkness is saying, but they're like, but the scribes can, and they're the only ones, and they write it down. And right there, I was like, okay, how do they know that they're not, that's what they're actually doing, and that there's actually more to the darkness, and that there's actually messages, and the darkness isn't just like there to feed. And it reminded me of the church I grew up in was Pentecostal, and they would have someone would stand up and they would speak in tongues, and then another
someone else would translate.
And then someone else would stand up and translate and say, God told me what they said. So this scenario reminded me of, because you're trusting that this person is being honest and that there's nothing more to it. And
right.
It
reminded me a little bit of the movie Midsummer. Did you ever watch that with Florence Pugh?
Yes.
When they go into that where they keep all their holy books, and you realize that it's actually a person who has been on purpose inbred to be their prophet, and so all the holy books are scribbles and like finger painting that have to then be interpreted. And I was like, that's so brilliant. I thought that was just the most brilliant metaphor for like divine messages. And this book is full of all kinds of bizarre beliefs, superstitions. I don't know. I just felt like I was in such a magical headspace while I was reading it. It made me really happy.
It was too dark for me.
I'm sorry.
It was, which when we get into kind of like spoilers and stuff, I'll give some specific examples of that.
Of the trauma.
of where I was just like, oh, you lost me there.
Really quick, I'm going to read a review from the LA Review of Books by Elizabeth Gonzalez James that I thought was a really good, concise way of talking about what the core story is here for anyone who is believed that we were just rambling and making no sense. Rosario's family, the English-born Bradfords, come to Argentina in the 1800s looking for cheap land and opportunity. How did they get rich? Oh, the usual, Rosario says in a section that narrates her personal history. Quote, looting, partnerships with other powerful people, understanding what side to take during the Civil War. That's the real life, dark realities of how their family got rich, is they kind of manipulated people. They participated in essentially slave labor. They benefited from war. The family owns vast yerba plantations and luxury properties around the country, which keep them well-heeled and give them the freedom to pursue their occult practices. Wealth, power, and evil are inextricably linked in Enriquez's world, the author, and it is only fitting that the Bradfords would pursue the favors of an evil god, an entity that appears when summoned like a black mist or gel that severs fingers and limbs if anyone tries to touch it, and which hungers for human flesh and then lovingly arranges the body parts and bones of its victim into a mysterious other place, like a collector posing figurines on a shelf. The other place I think is really interesting, and I want to get into that being kind of a foil to the real world, where in the real world there are these human atrocities happening, but it's, you know, it's like covered up, no one can see it. In the other world, it is used as decoration. Like, it is like, hey, look at how vile and disgusting the world is, to the point where it's almost beautiful. Did you make a drink?
I didn't, but I was just gonna recommend like Crush, because that's what he's constantly drinking.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Was a good detail to remember. Orange Crush, because the bulk of the story, when it's talking about Gaspar's teen years, it's in the 80s. There's a Stranger Things kind of vibe. They're riding their bikes everywhere. They're exploring haunted houses. They're just being kids in a world that is very dark, and so dark that then they don't even realize what roles they're about to play in this dark reality. The recipe that I chose was Tres Leches, which is like a caramel spread that they put on all of their bread and stuff.
Tres Leches stands for like 3 milks. And so like when you get Tres Leches cake, it's really moist because they use like, so I don't know,
like sweetened condensed milk is used in it a lot.
Yeah, but so how is Tres Leches caramel?
So it's because it's the sugar and the milk, and it's melted and it's warmed up, which is all that the ingredients in caramel. It's just sugar and milk that's okay. Warmed up. I think when you make it, it looks like peanut butter, but then you're pleasantly surprised that it's definitely more of like a dessert spread, and you can put it on anything. It seems to be a staple of Argentina. they put it on everything. And I was like, yes, find what you love
Yeah.
and let it kill you.
I would put it on everything too.
That recipe is on our Instagram. It's surprisingly easy. If I can make it, anyone can make it.
We'll see about that.
Amber's like, I burnt my house down trying to make Tres Leches. Let's talk about, from this point on, spoilers. Tell me why you didn't connect with the book in the same way I did, and what kind of made you decide it's not for me, which totally viable. Like, I will never read another Bridgerton's book ever again.
When I would sit down and read it, like, I liked it. Like, the writing was great. It's set up great. Like, there's no plot holes. There was nothing like fundamentally wrong with it. Like, it was a wonderfully written book. So I was like, why am I struggling so much to make myself sit down to start reading it? It's like going to the gym. Like, once I'm at the gym, I like working out, but I just can't get myself to
get yourself there.
Yeah, it's like this mental block. I think what it was is when you're reading a book, there's a goal, right? So there's something that they're trying to attain or conquer or do, and that's kind of the point. Well, maybe if I had read further, this opinion would have changed. But initially, the goal that was like apparent to me was Juan was trying to figure out how to save his son.
Right.
So either Gaspar becomes the next medium,
which he knows firsthand is awful,
which he doesn't want to happen, or if Gaspar doesn't have like the medium abilities, which Juan knows he does have them, but he's hiding it. Mm-hmm. But if he didn't, then Juan would have to overtake Gaspar's body,
right, and
continue being the medium.
Side note I'm glad you brought that up. The real end goal that the cult has, obviously wealth, power, influence, they have all that. They all want eternal life. Like, they want to never die. And so they've been doing, later on in their ceremonies, they're basically trying to be able to take over other people's bodies so that when they're old, all the higher up people in the cult will be able to take someone else's body and continue to live and run the cult and keep doing their dark arts.
To me, like, the obvious goals was that, like, he's trying to save his son, but I didn't see, like, normally there's an option. You see an option that's like the one they're trying to make happen because that's the best option. But both options were bad.
Right.
And so it wasn't like I'm rooting for this better thing to happen because I didn't know what that was. Like,
well, no, and when yes, I do agree. But when you find out the option that Juan chooses, it's so fucked up, and it ties in so many other questions that you had throughout why did he do that? Who is this person? What the hell? And then when you realize the final move, you're like, what the fuck?
Like, was like, if I read on, but just initially, like, I think that was the reason why I was having a hard time sitting down to read it, because it's like, well, I don't have anything I'm rooting for. There was just so much, I guess, like a dark overtone when he goes and he visits his dead wife's sister. They just immediately have sex. And I'm like, that was his wife's sister. And he's talking about constantly, like, how much he misses his wife and he's searching for her and he loved her. And that's what he's like, up until that point, he's like trying to find her. And then he goes and screws her sister. And
the sexuality in this book is very open. There's a lot of, especially Juan being the medium, he has sex with a lot of people because he gets power that way.
Right, but it's very flat. There's no feeling in it. There's no passion in it.
Juan and Esteban's relationship was my favorite.
Okay, Steven
and Esteban are the same person, but also Rosario and Laura as lovers.
But see, I didn't get that far. That's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. Like, if I'm reading for 200 pages, for my taste, like, to keep me, like, to have a reason to keep reading, maybe put that stuff in there sooner, just because this is like a 500 million page long book. And then whenever they go into the tunnel and he finds all these children in cages, and it talks about how they were being tortured and how they're like, like not even really children anymore, and they're just like disfigured and all of this. Like that whole, I was just like,
but that's so important. That's so important because, okay, so Mercedes, the reason why she's such a great villain is because the only thing she cared about was power. But because she didn't have any extrasensory abilities, she hated having to go through a medium. And so in times when they didn't have a medium between, because all of the mediums up until Juan lost their fucking minds and like went on a murder fest. That tunnel of deformed children that were being tortured by Mercedes is important because it really shows us who the god is. There are moments when you want to think, maybe this god's not so bad. Maybe this cult is onto something. Maybe I would even be intrigued to be a part of this cult. But when you see that the only way Mercedes is able to have any kind of power on her own is by viciously torturing people, and not just torturing them by like pulling their fingernails out or cutting them, but like taking someone's leg and breaking it off and then cutting open their chest and inserting it into their chest and letting it heal up that way. Like bizarre, grotesque things. That's what the darkness wants and then rewards her with power. That is such a visceral way to be like, fuck this god that they worship. Fuck the cult. It's not just like a little bit evil. It's like really, really evil, which then also complicates how we feel about Juan, because Juan serves it.
To the point I read, there was nothing good. There was nothing to justify anything. There was nothing to make me want to find out what happens to so-and-so, or, you know, so that's why I was just like, yeah, it's like, it's beautifully written and, you know, the story is done very well and everything, but why am I motivated to keep reading this? Like, it's just darkness, it's just evil, it's just this bad thing can happen or this bad thing can happen. And so if I have a choice to spend my time experiencing that,
right,
or experiencing something else, like I just had a hard time making myself devote time to it.
Yeah, and I don't think it was violence for the sake of violence, because sometimes I do like just like a good slasher movie, but typically I want it to be there to be a purpose, and the purpose is it's actually critiquing society. Like it's saying like, oh, you think this is barbaric and dehumanizing? Well, look at the society that built it and allowed this to happen and gave it power. And I think that the book is really talking about Mercedes represents, and the cult itself represents, that original dictatorship that first existed in the shadows, abducted people, hurt people, did everything it could for total control. I think that Juan and Rosario represented kind of a pushback against that, but not the same way that Betty and her daughter did, where they were like, this is wrong, we want nothing to do with this. Rosario and Juan were like, this is wrong, but we're still kind of benefiting from it, so we're not going to try to take it down. We're just going to like try to get power for ourselves and then use that power for good. So I think it had the spectrum of morality, and it was a critique of totalitarian systems. I really didn't feel like it was just gore and fucked upness just for shock value. It reminded me a lot of, did you ever see the Korean film Parasite that came out a couple of years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Parasite it basically shows how poor people will kill each other first. They see each other as enemies who they're fighting for limited resources, rather than both poor families had the opportunity to take down the wealthy family, but instead they admired them because they wanted what they had. And so they turned on each other, and that's what allows systems of inequality to flourish. And I love things that make you think like that, because it's never cut and dry. There's no easy answers. If there was, we wouldn't still have totalitarian governments now. We wouldn't have, the 1%. None of it's easy. No one knows how to fix it. So when you read a book that kind of fucks you up about it, that's my favorite, because that's all I think about then is like, what do you do? In a way, I'm a Rosario. I know that the world is bad. I know that there's a lot of bad stuff going on, but I look for ways to make myself happy and get my piece of the pie for my family. I'm not politically active. I'm not trying to help people. I'm not as socially conscious as I should be, but when I read books like this, it reminds me of that spectrum.
Themes, I love those themes in books, and I've read other books with those themes that I just enjoyed more in the way that they told it.
Yeah, like Handmaid's Tale had some romance, had some characters that you felt connected to. And so I'm like, that's why there's never going to be a shortage of like, well, we don't really need writers anymore. All the books have been written.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's why you need different types of books, because like you really enjoyed this. I did not. I think it was good.
Yeah.
But I didn't like enjoy my time reading it. I will say though, because it switches perspectives, and when it's in the perspective of Rosario's sister,
Talia.
Yeah. I liked that. Like I liked when it's in her perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get into the second section and it's from Gaspar's perspective, I liked that.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started thinking like, okay, maybe like I could keep reading this book. If she would have started it
with Gaspar as a teenager.
Without Juan, but just in a different, like, then I probably would have enjoyed. I mean, there's a difference between appreciating that a book is well written, has a good theme, is an important book, is culturally important, politically important, and then just actually enjoying your time reading it.
That's how I felt about War and Peace. Have you ever read War and Peace by Tolstoy?
No.
Not a fun book to read. It's super important, beautiful, lovely. Now, Anna Karenina, I read and enjoyed. It was captivating, lovely, great. War and Peace, I know it's important, but it was a chore.
Like, I can differentiate like something that's important and good and well done that I just don't enjoy, and then something that I enjoy that's not important, or like some thing that society needs. And so that's why like I want to slowly, like over time, I probably will finish reading this book because it is well done, and I was starting to enjoy it more once it got into that second part, but I had already taken like a month at that point, and so we couldn't put off the podcast any longer.
Yeah, what a whirlwind. That book was definitely traumatic though, for sure. So, total change of pace. What book are we reading next?
Okay, so the next book is Lessons in Chemistry, and
it's by Bonnie Garmus.
So this book I actually discovered because I have an app called Chirp, like CHIRP, and it's like Audible. You get audiobooks on there. But every day they send an email and it's like, hey, these are the books that are on sale today. And they'll be like $2 or $3 for the audio version. So the app's free, and then you just, buy books. And so Lessons in Chemistry was on there, and I hadn't even heard of this book. The cover was really cute. And I was like, chemistry, I don't want to read about chemistry, and it looked kind of sciencey, but the cover was cute. So I got it, and I was listening to the audiobook, and it was really, really good. And
by the way, this is the cover. I took the jacket off mine because I've been reading it.
Yeah.
But that's the cover.
That's the cover that got me. But then Apple TV just put the series out. I didn't even know they were making a series for it.
When you told me you picked the next one, I had been seeing it's got Captain Marvel, the chick who plays Brie Larson. Brie Larson has been on my Roku TV. When it goes to that screen, it'll be like, watch Lessons in Chemistry, a limited series or whatever. And I was like, what the fuck is that about? Because it looks like a 50s housewife. Like, I don't know, like to me it looked like WandaVision or something like that, and I was like, not interested. And then you were like, guess what we're reading? And I was like, fuck, but it's actually so good. It's not at all what I thought.
Yeah, so if I had read what it was about, I probably wouldn't have chosen it, but it was just like $2, and so I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot. It goes between different perspectives, and it has some of it is from the perspective of the dog. Also has really important themes of feminism, and so like she's this brilliant chemist, but it's like what, the 50s or 60s, and so it's the things that she deals with, like even in grad school and at work, like being a female, them, you know, just not respecting her and her brilliance. And so there's that aspect, and then there's a lot more.
She also doesn't have a ton of people skills, which makes her, she ingratiates her to me. I think if she was, because she's clearly attractive and she's brilliant, if she was a people person, I'd hate her. But she hates people. She only can connect to people by like making science happen in her brain to like explain the world around her. She's almost definitely, certainly on the autistic spectrum. She's fabulous. I thought I was going to hate her. If I had just seen a picture of her, I'd be like, fuck that bitch. But when you get inside her brain, you're like, what a weirdo. I love it.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the themes of the book, is that she's like very, very, very attractive. And so a lot of other females don't like her because the men are really drawn to her. And so the other females are jealous, and they don't. And then, you know, bosses try to take advantage of her, and it's like her attractiveness is actually a disservice to her.
Let us know what you thought of our spooky season book recommendations. A couple people left messages, like whether they, oh, I read that one, or oh yeah, what about this one? Those were great. Keep us posted, and if you ever have a recommendation where at this point you know what books I like, you know what books Amber likes, you know what books Amber doesn't like now after this episode for sure. Give us some recommendations. Let us know. We'll take them into consideration and give you a shout out. So thanks for watching or listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Books and Brunch with Amber and Noelle.